Good afternoon. So we put together some of the information. I think from talking to everybody here over the last couple of days, it's clear that there is a lot of work and a lot of innovation, to reference James' speech as well, around the open source world. One of the most frequent, in varied ways, questions we received is, well, what's going on? How does this actually happen? Where is the work happening? Who is using it? SourceForge acquired a company called Olo back in June, which have been doing gathering of all of this data. So I'll state at the beginning that this is gathered from the work that we've done at Olo. So by definition, Olo public directory, the crawler itself is open source. We've gone out, taken massive amount of data from thousands and thousands of forges that are out there. Everything from our own SourceForge.net to Google Code to the forges which are set up by one person and may have a project that only 5 people have downloaded before. Open to the public for editing, and the edits are supplemented by the data from the web crawler. And the metrics, and this is an important point, the metrics are derived by scanning the active source control repositories so that over time you get a picture of, even if a project has changed its language over time, you're getting a fuller picture of what languages they've used in the past as well. So, size, 390,000 projects. Done the source analyzation on 50,000 of them, which nets out to a little over 6.4 billion lines of code. And if you believe any of the silly metrics around cost per line of code, that equates to a heck of a lot of money at that point. 385,000 individual contributors, and of that we have gotten 18,000 of those contributors to give us geographic data as well. So the pulling it out from the repositories are important because it preserves a detailed history of the development work. So as I said at the beginning, if a language is changed over time, or contributors have moved in or out of a project over time, analyzing the repository history lets us know that. Also lets us know what license it's under, what language or languages it has been written in, and who the author is as well. We go through and we look inside for all of the various platforms, as you'll see in one of the slides. So this is an interesting one. This is merely year to date. What you can see is Subversion is obviously still one of the largest ones that's out there. What's noticeable is, 6 years ago, CVS would have been a much, much larger number. And what you're really seeing here is the fact that Git and Subversion have basically come along and destroyed most of CVS's market share. This is going to vary over time, obviously. I would be willing to predict that Mercurial will be going up as well, probably at the expense of Subversion. Bazaar, CVS is going to continue to fade away until there's almost nothing left. The sheer size of Git alone is interesting. That's probably a reflection of the popularity of Ruby on Rails as a development platform at this point. Total lines of code. So HTML you may or may not think of as code, but it's still something that is worth measuring. It's interesting to see just simply what people are actually writing in as an example of where people are applying their efforts at this point. Obviously, the other category contains many, many different languages. That's going to have Python in there, Erlang, Fortran, COBOL, whatever you might want to throw into there as well. This one is particularly interesting because C and C++ is thought of as, one of the most used and most common languages. And what you can see here is that it is basically on a steady state of decline at this point. The power has shifted to a number of other languages at this point. Ruby is obviously one of the big ones, Python, but you can see things happening in the Scala world, as well as Erlang as well. So I find this curious simply to see what, in many ways, it's very comparable to what has happened to CVS, where it was once at its height, it is now gradually declining over time. And at some point, I'm sure it'll never actually hit zero because there are, in fact, a lot of people out there still using COBOL or Fortran. Its relative rate of use is going to continue to go down. What is interesting, and it galls me to call JavaScript a programming language, but I think it probably has reached the point that it's worth calling it that at this point. C#, Python, and JavaScript are going up at a major rate. The left-hand axis on there is slightly misleading. That is actually a percentage. So, that's 2%, 4%, 6%, not the 0.02 on there as well. And the new language choices. This one was a little interesting to me as well, given simply the weight that Java has continued to go up as well, or that it is really in the top tier. It is also interesting that in some degrees it belays what the media coverage is around that. I mean, Ruby is obviously a very popular language, but the simple fact of the matter is that it's at a pretty low percentage rate when it comes to the new project language choices. And in fact, despite the fact that people have declared Perl dead for years now, Perl is still at a higher rate than Ruby is at this point. C# as well is continuing to grow, but obviously the biggest weight is coming out of the Python and Java communities at this point. So this data, this geographic data, was gathered inside of Olo. Contributors can come in, they can say, I am the contributor to this project, and one of the pieces of data that they can provide is where they live in. So obviously, and have discussed this with a number of you over the last few days, Western Europe is the predominant center for open source development, which is actually, to some degree, out of whack with the relative geographic weight, because North America ends up being smaller within that ratio as well. Although this is not called out in here, one of the ones that I find most interesting is the most statistical outlier in terms of country is Australia. The sheer amount of open source development that comes out of the Australian community is an interesting phenomenon that I'd love to know the reason for, but I have no good reason why it might be doing that. But you can see where the weight of that is coming. We've seen a lot of this as well in terms of where the traffic to SourceForge.net comes to. Brazil in particular has been growing at an incredibly rapid rate. Its relative weight of traffic is up, I believe, 9x over the last 2 years, and is a clear indication of what happens when you actually start to get the infrastructure in place and computers in place inside of the developing world, that there is a market opportunity for people want the software. They want to come and get it, and they want to become part of the contributing community around that as well. Relative weight of platform. It's more interesting than anything else to see the difference in the geographical side. France obviously has has the highest measurable Java adoption. The U.S. is interesting insofar as that it has relatively low compared to the other countries adoption of a standard platform. So whether that says something about the relative kind of market orientation or about the cultural identity, you can infer as you will at that point. And the platform count, this one is another interesting one as well. Prototype was obviously huge for quite a while, but as jQuery finally reached the point that it was no longer a giant bloated memory leaking thing, it has become much more used by many more people at this point. And I think it's part of the reason why you actually see JavaScript becoming one of the more popular programming languages as well. And if you have any questions about the statistics or data, please feel free to drop me an email. We do any one of a number of things, and I've enjoyed all the conversations that I've had with folks as well. Thank you.